A tariff is, in simple terms, a tax imposed on goods imported from another country. For decades, the global trend was towards lowering these taxes to encourage free trade. However, the Trump administration has dramatically reversed this course in 2025, embarking on an aggressive and widespread tariff policy. The stated objective is to protect and bolster American manufacturing, create jobs within the United States, and significantly reduce the nation's long-standing trade deficit with the rest of the world. This approach marks a fundamental shift away from the post-Cold War consensus on global economic integration, ushering in a period of profound uncertainty and strategic recalculation for nations everywhere. It's a bold gamble that redefines America's role on the world stage. This new policy is not subtle. The administration has introduced a baseline 10% tariff on nearly all imports, a stark increase from the previous average rate of under 2.5%. On top of this, specific countries deemed to be acting against American interests have been hit with much higher punitive rates. Many of these measures have been enacted using executive powers, such as the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which has sparked intense legal and constitutional debates within the United States. While an appeals court ruled many of these tariffs illegal in August 2025, they remain in effect as the world awaits a final decision from the Supreme Court later this year. The immediate economic effects in the United States have been complex and multifaceted. On one hand, the government's tariff revenues have soared, reaching an unprecedented $28 billion in June 2025 alone. Proponents argue this income could help reduce government borrowing over the next decade. On the other hand, a wide range of economists, including those at the Congressional Budget Office, have warned that while the tariffs might generate revenue, they could also cause the overall U.S. economy to shrink. American consumers are already beginning to feel the pinch, with companies like Target and Walmart warning that price increases on everyday goods are inevitable as the costs of imported products rise. Even America's closest traditional allies have not been spared from this new protectionist wave. The United Kingdom managed to negotiate the lowest rate of 10%, but plans for a zero-tariff deal on steel have been put on hold. The European Union has settled on a framework for a 15% tariff on most of its goods. Meanwhile, neighbors like Canada and Mexico are scrambling to renegotiate trade terms to avoid tariffs as high as 35%. This wide-reaching strategy has sent a clear message to the world. The old rules of trade are no longer in play, and every nation must now renegotiate its economic relationship with the United States on new, more challenging terms. While established economic powers in Europe and North America have been forced to adjust, it is the emerging economies of the Global South that have faced some of the most severe and targeted measures. In the summer of 2025, the Trump administration imposed steep punitive tariffs on several key developing nations, explicitly linking the economic penalties to their foreign policy decisions, particularly their continued trade with Russia. This move transformed the tariffs from a tool of economic protectionism into an instrument of geopolitical coercion, placing these countries in an incredibly difficult position. They were suddenly forced to choose between their own sovereign economic interests and the demands of the world's largest economy, a choice with immense consequences. The impact has been particularly acute for major players like India and Brazil. Both countries were hit with a staggering 50% tariff on their goods, a decision the US government directly tied to their purchases of discounted Russian crude oil. For nations striving to manage inflation and secure affordable energy for their large populations, this was a devastating blow. Similarly, South Africa was slapped with a 30% tariff, and Vietnam faced a 20% tariff, creating significant economic headwinds for their export-oriented industries. These actions were not just about balancing trade. They were a clear and powerful signal that economic access to the US market would now be conditional on geopolitical alignment. This aggressive strategy has created immense challenges for businesses and workers in these countries. Industries that had been built over years to serve the American market, from Indian textiles to Brazilian agricultural products, suddenly found their primary export destination to be prohibitively expensive. This has led to canceled orders, factory slowdowns, and the threat of widespread job losses. The tariffs have disrupted supply chains that were carefully constructed to be efficient and cost-effective, forcing a painful and costly re-evaluation of business models. The economic shockwaves are being felt not just in corporate boardrooms, but in the daily lives of countless workers and their families across the Global South. The underlying message from Washington is that the era of separating trade from politics is over. For decades, countries in the Global South pursued economic development by integrating into the US-led global system. confident that as long as they played by the economic rules, their political autonomy would be respected. President Trump's tariffs have shattered that assumption. By explicitly punishing countries for their diplomatic and trade relationships with other nations, the policy forces them into a corner. It pressures them to abandon long-standing principles of non-alignment and strategic autonomy, a core tenet of foreign policy for countries like India for over 70 years. Faced with this immense pressure from the United States, the targeted nations of the Global South have not simply capitulated. Instead, the tariffs have acted as a powerful catalyst, accelerating a trend that was already underway, the strengthening of trade and political ties among themselves. This South-South cooperation is no longer just a topic for diplomatic summits. It has become an urgent economic necessity. Rather than bending to Washington's demands, countries like India, Brazil, and South Africa are actively working to reduce their economic dependence on the US and Europe, building a new architecture for global trade that places them at the center. One of the most visible examples of this growing solidarity is the revitalization of the BRICS bloc, which now includes new influential members like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. The group is increasingly positioning itself as a counterweight to Western economic dominance. In response to the US tariffs, Brazilian President Lula has been a vocal advocate for a coordinated response, even proposing that the bloc consider joint counter-tariffs. This represents a significant shift from passive recipients of global rules to active shapers of them. The BRICS nations are exploring ways to trade more with each other using local currencies, further insulating their economies from the influence of the US dollar and American financial policy. This spirit of cooperation was also on full display at the mid-2025 Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. The gathering brought together leaders from China, Russia, India, and over a dozen other nations, all of whom pledged to resist what they called Cold War mentalities. For India, which has historically balanced its relationships with both the West and the East, the summit provided a crucial platform to deepen its strategic and economic ties with China and Russia, precisely at a moment when its relationship with the US was under strain. These forums are becoming critical venues for coordinating policy and building a shared vision for a world order less dominated by a single power. Beyond high-level summits, these nations are taking practical steps to build a more independent economic future. They are focused on developing their own trade policies, creating new supply chains that bypass Western markets, and establishing dispute resolution mechanisms that operate outside of traditional US and European frameworks. This is a deliberate effort to build economic sovereignty and resilience. The goal is to create a system where their economic destinies are not subject to the political whims of Washington. The tariffs, intended to assert American dominance, may have inadvertently pushed these rising powers to build a world where that dominance is no longer absolute. The combination of punitive American tariffs and the coordinated response from the Global South is fundamentally redrawing the map of global investment and trade. As Western companies seek to reduce their exposure to China to avoid being caught in the crossfire of the US-China tariff war, they are increasingly looking for alternative manufacturing hubs. This has created a significant opportunity for other emerging economies. Nations like Vietnam, India, and even Brazil are becoming attractive destinations for new investment, as multinational corporations frantically reconfigure their supply chains to navigate this new and unpredictable trade landscape. This shift is not just about moving factories, it's about redistributing economic power. This realignment offers a chance for Global South countries to capture a larger share of global manufacturing and climb the economic value chain. For example, as a major US pharmaceutical company like Bristol Myers Squibb reduces its stake in its Chinese operations, it creates an opening for countries like India, which already has a robust pharmaceutical industry, to attract that investment and expertise. This process allows them to fill the gaps left by the de-risking from China, creating jobs, transferring technology, and boosting their own industrial capacity. In essence, Trump's tariffs are forcing a diversification of global supply chains that could end up benefiting many of the very regions he is targeting. Ultimately, these shifts signal the potential end of the unipolar US-centric era of globalization and the beginning of a more multipolar world. The global economy may be fragmenting into several distinct blocks, each with its own major players, supply chains, and rules. The Global South, led by powers like India, Brazil, and an expanded BRICS, is emerging as a credible and increasingly independent economic pole. These countries are no longer content to be junior partners in a system designed by the West. They are building their own institutions and partnerships, driven by a shared desire for greater autonomy and a more equitable distribution of global power. The future of international trade will likely be more complex and perhaps less efficient than the system it is replacing, but it may also be more balanced. President Trump's tariff strategy, designed to reassert American economic supremacy, appears to be having the opposite effect. It has forced emerging powers to accelerate their collaboration, strengthen their own economic ecosystems, and chart a more independent course. The long-term consequence may not be a return to American manufacturing dominance, but rather the rise of a more diverse and decentralized global economic order, where power is more widely distributed than ever before. This is the great paradox of the 2025 tariff wars.